I am a minute man. I am the guardian of America, armed and free. For we knew it will always be the citizen who is
tell us about GOV360. What is it that your organization does? What is it that you'd like to see happen?
Well, GOV360, it's interesting. I just listened to the tail end of the last segment, and really they were talking a lot about empowering people. That's what GOV360 is all about. We're an educational 501c3. So as a 501c3, we're bound to neutrality or bipartisanship. We're not a 501c4 like a foundation or a lobbying organization, because and a lot of people kind of ask me why not form a 501c4 and push a certain agenda. But really, the agenda is to push the Founding Fathers' intention of participation and empowering people to be involved in self-governing as a representative republic. We have to pick our representatives. So that's what I hope you guys can hear me okay. I just want to also give a shout out to all of GOV360 supporters that I asked to listen in or perhaps call in. Some of them are a little nervous, so they might not be calling in.
That's okay. I love, there's one thing that we share in common. I don't know what our disagreements are or may be, but there's one thing we share in common, in that you call it a representative republic. It's so
Definitely.
It's so important to realize the difference between that and a democracy, because our Constitution was written to protect us against democracy. If you look
exactly.
Yeah.
And you look at what a great nickname for a democracy is mob rule, or a great sort of term to sum it up. And a representative republic is rule of law. So you've got a situation where you can say, like with gun rights, you could say, okay, people could take up guns and go storm Washington or storm their government. But then that becomes what?
Mob rule. Right, exactly.
Right. We have rule of law where you're supposed to participate.
No, the idea of storming, pardon my interruption, but the idea, if that ever were to happen, would be if Washington stormed us and we put them back in their place. It wouldn't be so much us storming them. It would be if they exceeded the rule of law and we needed force to reinforce the rule of law to restore order, not out of chaos, not to have a mob rule by overthrowing government.
Sure, and we have to define where do we draw the line as far as Washington attacking us, because maybe they already have. Maybe they've already crossed that line.
Well, they did at Waco. They certainly did at Ruby Ridge.
Okay.
And
those are great examples.
Yeah, and those are examples of how the Second Amendment worked, and I think worked fairly well.
And then, we also have, in the 20th century, we have examples of war really bringing a lot of Americans together. Because let's face it, if you were a New Deal Democrat or a very conservative, what would later become like a Goldwater conservative, and you're fighting in a foxhole in Germany or France, you guys are buddies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And here we are today, much more divided, and really the only successful major revolution in this country has happened in a nonviolent way, where nobody took any guns against Washington.
Well, armed insurrection rarely works out well. Just ask General Lee. But I want to go. I've recently been reading a lot about the Civil War. I'm reading I'm going to read The Stillness at Appomattox by Bruce Caton next, but I'm reading the 3-volume set of Lee's Lieutenants by William Southall Freeman, and it's just fascinating to learn about it. But anyway, I digress. You posed a question on the front page of your website. Do people who are non-voters expect things to change if they don't vote? And I lovingly and respectfully think that may be the wrong question. I think the question is, how do we reduce the power and influence of government? Because I think what we have now is a sickle cell growth of government, and it is metastasized. We've become statostatic. We've relied so much on government to do so many things, as we were referring to, as you heard on Hold on the last hour, that we've ignored the culture of self-sufficiency.
Sure.
So I think what we ought to be looking is, how do we disempower government? Not how do we empower people to participate in it, but how do we encourage people to tear down the parts of government that it should not be doing.
The interesting correlation to that point, Charles, and I'm glad you bring this up, is because statistically the vast majority of Americans don't vote or participate. I mean, 60% of registered Democrats, 80% of registered independent, other third-party non-voters. We've got also 30 million who are not even registered at all, who refuse to participate completely. Thereby, you're talking about people who are already rejecting government as it is currently. The vast majority. Now, see, what I'm saying is, we got to take this major power and utilize it somehow. Now, some of the chips may fall the way of quote-unquote big government. Some of these people who are not voting now that kind of mindlessly go and vote in a presidential election, but they don't vote in a congressional election. Maybe if their votes fell toward one side or the other, they might tend to fall toward a bigger government. But in theory, the people have to decide.
I disagree that the people have to decide. That's what representative government is for. Government is feckless at doing most things because in almost all cases, its reach exceeds its effective grasp. We need to be cultivating a culture of self-sufficiency and not trying to get more people's participation in government. I think what we ought to do is we ought to have more people. Are you familiar with what happens when a person gets older, Lawrence, and they begin to have heart problems? It's called collateral circulation. The heart makes its own bypass. What happens is when you start to get arterial blockages in a heart, new capillaries start sort of growing within the heart, and it actually bypasses so that you get what's called collateral circulation, and the heart doesn't die. I think that's kind of what we're seeing in our country today. I think what we're seeing today is people saying, you know what, who gives a rat's round end about what the government does? They're irrelevant. We're just going to do our own thing. And I think, in a lot of ways, I think that's a real healthy growth. Do you disagree?
Well, I disagree only because the intention of the Founding Fathers is very clear in Article 1, Section 2, the first sentence, the people of the several states shall choose their representatives. So to be a representative republic, we have to have more than 20% of the people choosing the representatives. And currently, if you look at the U.S. House, it's 20% at best of the total electorate on average, district by district, is picking the representative.
Lawrence, I got to congratulate you on something. This is one of the rare times in the last 13 years that anyone's ever hit me over the head with the Constitution successfully.
Well, if you study Madison, and I'm from Charlottesville, and Madison lived right up the road. Listen, it took me years. I mean, I came out of college in Montana, having never voted until I was nearly, I was 38. I think the first time I voted, and so where I'm coming from it is from the perspective of, why are so many people not involved in self-governing? And does that really make us a better, function better when so many people aren't? So when I say that in the Einstein video, I say, to that's specifically addressed to non-voters,
And welcome back to America Armed and Free on AM 1030 KVOI, Cortero, Tucson, The Voice, and AM 930 KAPR out in Douglas, and AM 1240 KJAA up in Globe. We have with us Lawrence Gaughan. Lawrence is a documentary producer, and he's been an actor, and he's a successful guy, Screen Actors Guild member in Hollywood, and he splits his time between there and Virginia. If you have any questions for him, you can call in at 520-790-2040. And I guess you wanted to ask me about some Second Amendment stuff, so I want to throw the floor open to you and toss it into your corner for a few minutes, Lawrence. What would you like to ask me?
Well, first you got me into trouble by bringing up my union membership with the Screen Actors Guild, but I just want to yell at, it's a guild. It's not really a union. So.
And you're not in Wisconsin protesting?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the funny thing about Wisconsin is 60% of the Democrats didn't vote in 2010. So, here they are out there protesting.
Well, they're still not voting. They went all the way to Illinois so they wouldn't have to.
that's the thing. I mean, not the legislature, but I mean the actual citizens didn't vote to elect more Democrats, and so now that they've got Republicans in there, they're showing up and protesting. You see what I'm saying? It's just a funny thing that we do, or that people do in this country. But getting to the issue of what drew me in to call you is, I started thinking about, the idea. I mean, we agree that we're not going to debate the Second Amendment of the Constitution because it doesn't really apply. You're in Arizona. You've got your state laws. I've got.
Oh no, it applies, but it's not as direct as our state constitution is, which is more specific than the federal Second Amendment. Our state constitution says the right of the individual citizen to bear arms in defense of self or state shall not be impaired, but no law shall issue forth as to authorize the keeping of an armed body of men. That's the letter of Arizona's Article 2, Section 26, which is the right to bear arms.
Interesting. I should have looked up the actual wording. But, I sort of posed the rhetorical question when I called in and left that message about, how did, I think what I want to ask you is just the broader issue of how do you think that we got the invention of gunpowder from the Chinese in the 12th or 13th century. It kind of came over through the silk trade through Europe, and then it was brought over here, and then we make guns, and now we embrace them as sort of the be all and end all of our way to counter tyranny. And that's, broadly speaking, the big debate, what's behind the big debate for the right to have guns and weapons. Do you think that there is a sense that's justifiable? That makes sense to have that expectation that we can overthrow our government. You mean that
the citizens, well, it's reasonable in that it's a sense of responsibility. It promotes having people be armed promotes a culture of individual responsibility and individual ownership of government. Because an armed man is a citizen, a disarmed man is a slave. That's why in England they're called subjects, not citizens. And if a person is capable, if a person is sui juris, if they're capable of making their own legal decisions, then part of the essence of humanity is the right to self-defense. And as Cesare Beccaria said, that it's an extension, the right to arms is an extension of the right to self-defense. A right without a tool of the enforcement of that right is feckless. So yes, do I anticipate we will ever overthrow the government of the United States? No. Nor would I wish to, nor would I encourage anyone to have thoughts in that direction. That said, if by some crazy edict, let's say a sheriff went nuts and ordered his deputies to go into a certain area and seize all the guns, I would...
Arizona sheriff?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I'm just, if let's say, for example, somebody did that. Now, that's illegal in Arizona. We specifically made it a law in 2007 that the government of Arizona may not seize the firearms of any people during an emergency unless that individual person is misbehaving with the arm.